When 7-year-old Lark Meadows vanished from her front yard one sunny Saturday afternoon, her father Elliot's world shattered forever. For just 5 minutes, he went inside to answer a phone call. When he returned, only her stuffed rabbit remained, on the grass. For 8 long years, Elliot never stopped searching, even as the town moved on and hope faded. His only clue? The strange behavior of his quiet neighbor, Vernon, and the dogs that kept mysteriously digging at Vernon's backyard kennel. What dark secret lies beneath the concrete floor that the dogs are so desperate to uncover? And if Elliot finally finds his daughter after all these years, will she even remember who she is? Elliot Meadows watched his daughter Lark through the kitchen window as she spun in circles, her wild red curls bouncing in the sunlight. She was playing her favorite game, Dizzy Explorer, where she'd spin until she could barely stand, then try to walk in what she thought was a straight line across the yard. "Dad, watch me," Lark called, her 7-year-old voice carrying easily through the open window. "I'm going to break my record." "I'm watching, Larky Bird," Elliot replied, smiling as he rinsed the lunch dishes. Saturday, afternoons like this were precious. Just him and his little girl enjoying the warm spring day in their front yard in Pinefield. Lark clutched Mr. Whiskers, her stuffed rabbit with one floppy ear, against her chest as she twirled. The toy went everywhere with her since Elliot's wife, Maggie, had given it to Lark on her 4th birthday, just 3 months before the car accident that took Maggie away forever. The phone rang, startling Elliot from his thoughts. He dried his hands on a dish towel and glanced at the caller ID. It was Mrs. Harmon, a client who had commissioned a custom dining table. He looked back at Lark, who had flopped down on the grass, giggling as she waited for the world to stop spinning. 5 minutes, okay? He called through the window. "Stay in the yard." "Okay, Daddy." Lark waved, sitting up and placing Mr. Whiskers carefully beside her. Elliot answered the phone, pacing into the living room as Mrs. Harmon asked detailed questions about wood types and stain options. As a single dad running his own carpentry business, these weekend interruptions were sometimes unavoidable. He kept his answers short, hoping to end the call quickly. "Cedar would work beautifully, but it's going to raise the price by about—" Elliot stopped, mid-sentence as he realized he couldn't see Lark through the front window anymore. He moved closer to the glass. "Mrs. Harmon, can I call you back in a few minutes?" Without waiting for an answer, Elliot hung up and walked to the front door. He wasn't worried. Yet, Lark was probably just on the other side of the big oak tree, or picking dandelions by the mailbox. "Lark?" he called, stepping onto the porch. The front yard was small but neat, with a white picket fence that Elliot had built himself when Lark started walking. The gate was still closed. No answer came back to him. "Lark Meadows, where are you hiding?" he called again, his voice a little louder. Sometimes she played hiding games, but she always answered when he used her full name. The yard remained silent except for the chirping of birds and the distant sound of a lawnmower down the street. Elliot stepped off the porch, his eyes scanning every corner of the yard. He spotted Mr. Whiskers lying in the grass, one button eye staring up at the sky. A chill ran through him. Lark never left Mr. Whiskers behind. Never. "Lark!" he shouted, his voice cracking with the first hint of panic. He ran to the gate and looked up and down the quiet street. A few houses down, old Mr. Finley was mowing his lawn. On the other side, the new neighbor's house, the one with the big dog kennel in back, sat quiet. No sign of movement. Elliot's heart began to pound as he jogged down one side of the street, then the other, calling Lark's name. Mr. Finley turned off his mower when he saw Elliot's frantic movements. "Something wrong, Elliot?" he asked. "I can't find Lark," Elliot said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "She was just in the yard. Just 5 minutes ago." Mr. Finley's friendly face turned serious. "Let me help you look." Within minutes, other neighbors emerged, from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Rodriguez, from across the street, pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she said firmly. "Better safe than sorry." Elliot nodded, unable to speak. He ran back to his yard, searching behind. Every bush and tree, calling until his voice grew hoarse. She had to be here. She had to be. But she wasn't. By the time police cars pulled up 30 minutes later, half the neighborhood was searching for Lark. Officer May Santos, young and new to the force, took Elliot's statement as her partner organized the growing crowd into search parties. "How long was she out of your sight?" Officer Santos asked, her pen poised over her notepad. 5 minutes, maybe 6, Elliot said, clutching Mr. Whiskers so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I was on the phone. She was right here, playing in the yard." "And the gate was closed?" "Yes. It has a child lock on it. She couldn't have opened it herself." His voice broke. "Someone must have—" He couldn't finish the sentence. More officers arrived with search dogs. One of the German shepherds sniffed Mr. Whiskers, then picked up Lark's scent trail. The dog followed it to the sidewalk in front of the house, then along the street for about 50 yards before stopping abruptly in front of the new neighbor's house. "The trail ends here," the canine officer said, frowning, "like she got into a vehicle." Elliot felt his knees go weak. "A car? Someone took her in a car?" The officer nodded grimly. "That would be my guess." By nightfall, police had set up floodlights in the yard. Detectives interviewed everyone on the block, including Vernon Blackwood, the quiet older man who had moved in 2 weeks earlier. Vernon claimed he hadn't seen anything. He'd been inside all day with his 3 German shepherds, who were kept in a large kennel in his backyard. Elliot hardly heard any of this. He sat on his front steps, watching as officers combed through every inch of his property. Someone had draped a blanket over his shoulders, though he wasn't cold. Someone else had pressed a cup of coffee into his hands, though he couldn't drink it. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "They'll find her," she kept saying. "Children wander off all the time." But Elliot knew better. Lark wouldn't wander off. She knew not to leave the yard. And she would never, ever leave Mr. Whiskers behind. As the last light faded from the sky, Elliot walked to the spot where Mr. Whiskers had been found. He knelt on the grass, imagining Lark's small hands letting go of her most precious possession. What had happened in this very spot while he was inside on the phone? What had she seen? Had she called for him? The thought of Lark calling for him while he chatted about cedar versus oak made something break inside him. He clutched the stuffed rabbit to his chest and let out a sound that was barely human. A howl of anguish that silenced everyone in the yard. "I was right here," he whispered to the toy rabbit. "I was right here, and I didn't hear her." Officer Santos approached cautiously, kneeling beside him. "Mr. Meadows, we've issued an Amber Alert. Every officer in the state is looking for Lark now. We'll set up a command center at the station. You should try to get some rest. We'll need a recent photo and—" "I'm not leaving," Elliot said, his voice raw. "She might come back. She might find her way home." Officer Santos's young face was full of sympathy. But Elliot could see in her eyes what she wouldn't say. Children who disappeared like this rarely found their way home on their own. The night grew deeper around them. Search parties with flashlights moved through the nearby woods. The police radio crackled with updates, all negative. No sightings, no leads. Elliot remained kneeling in the grass, clutching Mr. Whiskers like a life preserver. In the beam of the floodlights, he could see a single red hair caught on the rabbit's worn fabric. A tiny piece of his daughter, already a relic of the past. "Lark!" He screamed her name once more into the darkness, as if the force of his voice could, somehow, bring her back. But only silence answered, broken by the distant wail of yet another. Police siren racing toward Pinefield. His little girl was gone. For the first week after Lark disappeared, Elliot didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her spinning in circles, red curls flying, heard her calling, "Watch me, Dad!" How could he have looked away, even for 5 minutes? The police set up a command center in the Pinefield Community Center. Lark's face, gap-toothed smile, bright green eyes, freckles scattered across her nose like cinnamon, stared out from posters taped to every lamppost and storefront in town. Detective Morris, a gray-haired man with sad eyes, was assigned to lead the case. "We're doing everything we can," he told Elliot during their daily meetings, "but I need you to prepare yourself. Most children who aren't found in the first 48 hours." "Don't," Elliot cut him off. "Don't say it. Lark isn't most children. She's smart. She's a fighter." Elliot refused to set foot in his carpentry workshop. Instead, he turned his dining room into a search headquarters. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins showing places already searched. Mrs. Rodriguez brought food that he didn't eat. Mr. Finley mowed his lawn without being asked. People were kind, but their sad eyes told Elliot what they were thinking. Poor man. He'll never see his daughter again. Officer Santos stopped by often, even when she wasn't on duty. "You should sleep," she said on day 9, finding Elliot hunched over his laptop at 2 a.m., creating missing posters with new photos of Lark. "I'll sleep when she's home," he answered, not looking up. 3 weeks in, local news stations lost interest. State police pulled back resources. Only Detective Morris and Officer Santos seemed to care as much as Elliot did. But even they had other cases. Elliot didn't. Finding Lark was his only job now. He made a website, findlarkmeadows.com. He appeared on regional news shows. He drove to neighboring towns to put up posters. He followed every tip, no matter how small. Meanwhile, the new neighbor, Vernon Blackwood, kept to himself. His 3 German shepherds barked whenever anyone came near his property. During the IVU's initial search, Vernon had allowed police to look around his house and yard, but Elliot noticed how nervous the man seemed. Why had Vernon moved to Pinefield just 2 weeks before Lark vanished? And why had Lark's scent trail stopped near his house? "We've checked him out thoroughly," Detective Morris assured Elliot. "No criminal record. Retired civil engineer. Lived with his brother until the brother died 6 months ago. Inherited some money. Wanted a quiet place to live." But Elliot couldn't shake his suspicions, especially when he noticed how Vernon avoided making eye contact whenever they passed each other on the street. And then there was the kennel, a large, solid structure that seemed too big for just 3 dogs. Vernon had built it himself right after moving in. "What's under it?" Elliot asked Officer Santos one day. "Have they looked under the kennel floor?" "There's nothing under it," she said gently. "It's just a concrete slab. The dogs would have alerted if... She didn't finish. If Lark was buried there, that's what she meant. Summer faded into fall. Lark's 8th birthday came and went. Elliot bought her a cake anyway, and blew out the candles himself, wishing with all his heart for her return. He left her bedroom, exactly as it was. Fresh sheets on the bed in case she came home in the night. By Christmas, some of Elliot's friends stopped calling. It was too hard to know what to say. The reward money for information grew to $50,000 thanks to donations, but no credible leads emerged. Sometimes Elliot called Lark's name in the night, just to keep the sound of it alive. In February, Detective Morris retired. His replacement, Detective Walsh, was efficient but distant. He had 20 other cases and limited time for Elliot's. Theories about Vernon. Blackwood. "Let the police do their job," Walsh said when Elliot called for the 3rd time in a week. "We'll contact you if there's news." But Elliot couldn't just wait. He began watching Vernon's house, noting the man's schedule. Vernon left every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, returning 2 hours later with groceries. On Saturdays, a delivery truck brought large bags of dog food. The dogs, Kaiser, Rex, and Bella, Elliot had learned their names, spent most of their time in the kennel, except during bad weather when Vernon let them stay in the garage. 6 seeds. Months after Lark disappeared, Elliot received a call about a girl matching her description, spotted at a mall 3 hours away. He drove there immediately, heart pounding with hope. But it wasn't Lark. It was never Lark. When he returned home that night, exhausted and heartbroken all over again, he found Officer Santos, now promoted to Senior Officer Santos, sitting on his porch. "I have something to show you," she said, holding out a small evidence bag. Inside was a child's hair elastic, bright purple with a plastic flower attached. This was found on a hiking trail about 30 miles from here. Elliot's hands shook as he took the bag. "This is Lark's. She was wearing it that day." His voice broke. "Does this mean—" "It doesn't necessarily mean anything," Santos said carefully. "It could have been dropped by the person who took her. Or it could have blown there somehow. But we're organizing a new search of that area tomorrow. I wanted you to know." For the first time in months, Elliot felt a spark of real hope. He spent that night looking at maps of the area where the hair elastic was found, planning where to search, imagining the moment. He would finally hold Lark in his arms again. The search found nothing. Not a single additional clue. On the 1-year anniversary of Lark's disappearance, the town of Pinefield held a candlelight vigil. Hundreds of people came. They sang songs and shared memories and promised Elliot they wouldn't forget Lark. That night, after everyone left, Elliot sat alone on his porch steps, just as he had the night she vanished. Mr. Whiskers clutched in, his hands worn thin from a year of desperate holding. Across the street, a light flickered on in Vernon's house. Through the window, Elliot could see him moving around his kitchen. "I know you took her," Elliot whispered, "and I'm going to prove it." 1 year gone, and he was no closer to finding his little girl. But Elliot Meadows would never stop looking. Never. By the 3rd anniversary of Lark's disappearance, Elliot hardly recognized himself. His once neat beard had grown wild, streaked with gray though he was only 38. The carpentry business that had once supported him and Lark now barely survived on the few jobs he managed to complete. Most days, he couldn't focus long enough to make precise cuts or sand edges smooth. "You're 3 weeks late on this bookshelf," Mrs. Harmon said when she called. the same Mrs. Harmon who had been on the phone when Lark vanished. Her voice was gentle but firm. "I'm sorry, Elliot, but I need to hire someone else." Elliot couldn't blame her. He hung up without arguing and added her name to his mental list of lost clients. His house, once full of warmth and laughter, now felt like a museum of grief. Dust gathered on picture frames. Mail piled up on the kitchen counter. Only Lark's room remained pristine, cleaned weekly in case today was the day she came home. Detective Walsh had stopped returning his calls months ago. The FindLarkMeadows.com website still existed, but no one visited it anymore. The reward money sat untouched in a special account. Most of the missing posters around town had been taken down or replaced, with notices about community events and lost pets. The world had moved on. Elliot couldn't. "You need to take care of yourself," Senior Officer Santos, now Detective Santos, told him during one of her visits. Unlike others, she still checked on him regularly. "Lark would want you to be okay." "Don't talk about her like she's dead," Elliot snapped, immediately regretting his tone. Santos was his only real ally at the police department now. "I'm sorry. I can't give up." "I'm not asking you to give up," Santos said. "I'm asking you to give yourself permission to live while you're looking." But how could he live when half his heart was missing? Some days, the only thing that got Elliot out of bed was watching Vernon Blackwood's house, tracking the old man's movements, searching for any slip-up that might reveal his secrets. Vernon rarely left home now except for his twice-weekly grocery trips. His health seemed to be declining. He walked with a slight shuffle and sometimes paused to catch his breath. The dogs, now gray-muzzled themselves, spent less time in the kennel and more time in the house. Elliot watched it all, making notes in a thick binder labeled Evidence. On bad nights, and there were many, Elliot drank too much. Whiskey helped dull the constant ache, the endless loop of what-ifs. What if he hadn't answered the phone that day? What if he had installed a better lock on the gate? What if he had moved to a different town entirely? "You can't keep torturing yourself," Dr. Leslie, the therapist he occasionally saw at Santos's insistence, told him. "It wasn't your fault." But it was. He was her father. He was supposed to protect her. The drinking got worse after Elliot received a letter from his bank. He was 3 months behind on his mortgage payments. Without steady work, his savings had dwindled to almost nothing. The letter used cold, impersonal language, but the message was clear. Pay up or lose your house. Lose the house where Lark had taken her first steps, where she had blown out birthday candles, where she might still come home to someday. The thought was unbearable. That night, after finishing half a bottle of whiskey, Elliot made a decision. He would break into Vernon's kennel and see what was underneath it once and for all. The old man was hiding something, Elliot was sure of it, and he was tired of waiting for the police to care. Under cover of darkness, Elliot crept across the street with a crowbar hidden under his jacket. Vernon's house was dark. The dogs were inside for the night. The kennel stood silent and empty in the moonlight. Elliot approached the chain-link fence surrounding Vernon's backyard, his heart pounding in his ears. Just as he was about to climb over, a voice called out behind him. "Elliot, stop!" He turned to find Detective Santos standing on the sidewalk, still in her work clothes. "How did you know?" he asked, not bothering to hide the crowbar. "Mrs. Rodriguez called the station. She saw you leave your house with something in your jacket." Santos took a step toward him. "Breaking and entering is a felony. If Vernon presses charges, you could go to jail." "I don't care," Elliot said, his words slurring slightly. "There's something under that kennel. I know it." "There isn't," Santos insisted. "We checked. Twice. Ground-penetrating radar. Cadaver dogs. Nothing." "Then why does he act so guilty? Why did he move here right before she vanished? Why?" "Because his brother was a suspect in a different missing child case 15 years ago," Santos interrupted. "Vernon wasn't involved, but the case destroyed his brother's reputation. The community turned against them. Vernon came here for a fresh start after his brother died." Elliot stared at her, the crowbar suddenly heavy in his hand. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. Vernon Blackwood is an innocent old man who's already had his life ruined by suspicion once. He doesn't deserve to go through it again." The world seemed to tilt around Elliot. For 3 years, he had focused all his fear and rage on Vernon. Without that target, where would he direct his pain? "Come on," Santos said gently, taking the crowbar from his unresisting hands. "I'll drive you home." The next morning, Elliot woke on his couch with a pounding headache and fragmented memories of the night before. Santos had left a note on his coffee table with the name and phone number of an addiction counselor. Next to it sat a sandwich wrapped in plastic and a business card for a construction company looking for experienced carpenters. Elliot pushed himself up and caught sight of his reflection in the TV screen. Bloodshot eyes, tangled hair, wrinkled clothes he'd been wearing for at least 3 days. He didn't recognize the hollow-eyed stranger staring back at him. This wasn't the father Lark knew. This wasn't the man who could find her. This was a ghost, fading a little more each day. Elliot picked up the counselor's number with trembling fingers. If he was going to keep searching for Lark, and he would never stop, he needed to be stronger than this. He needed to be someone who could actually help her when she was found, not a broken shell of a man. He glanced at the worn photo of Lark on the end table, her smile frozen in time. "I'm still looking for you," he whispered, "but I need to find myself first." 5 years after Lark's disappearance, Elliot's life had found a fragile balance. He worked full-time at Wilson Construction, where his carpentry skills earned him respect despite his occasional distant moods. He attended his support group meetings twice a week. He kept his house clean. He limited himself to 1 drink on Friday nights only. But he still hadn't touched Lark's room, and he still checked the FindLarkMeadows.com website every single day, hoping for new tips or sightings. Detective Santos, now Captain Santos, and head of the Pinefield Police Department's Small Detective Division, still met with him monthly. She never said the words "cold case," though Elliot knew that's what Lark's file had become. "Any news?" he would ask at the start of each meeting. "Not yet," she would answer, never saying no, never closing the door completely on hope. On the 5th anniversary of Lark's disappearance, Elliot didn't attend the candlelight vigil. Only a handful of people showed up anyway. Instead, he sat on his porch swing with Mr. Whiskers, threadbare now, 1 button eye missing, and watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. She'd be 12 now, he told the stuffed rabbit, starting middle school, maybe playing an instrument or joining a sports team. The night air was warm and still, carrying the scent of Mrs. Rodriguez's roses from across the street. Elliot's eyelids grew heavy. He hadn't been sleeping well lately, plagued by the same nightmare he'd had for years. Lark calling for him, just out of reach, her voice fading as he desperately tried to find her. But that night, on his porch swing, he fell into a deep sleep, and he dreamed something new. In the dream, Lark stood in Vernon Blackwood's backyard, looking exactly as she had at 7 years old. She wore the same yellow dress she'd had on the day she vanished. But instead of fear, her face showed urgency. "Dad," she said clearly, pointing at the ground beneath the dog kennel. "Look here. Promise me, you'll look." Elliot tried to reach her, but his feet wouldn't move. "Larky bird," he called. "Are you there? Are you really there?" She kept pointing, more insistent now. "Look under, Dad. Look under." Elliot woke with a gasp, nearly falling off the porch swing. His heart hammered against his ribs. The dream had felt so real, not like the usual nightmares of loss and guilt, but like a message. Across the street, Vernon's porch light flicked on. The old man shuffled outside in his bathrobe to retrieve his newspaper, moving slowly with the help of a cane. In the 5 years since Lark disappeared, Vernon had aged drastically. Now in his 70s, he rarely left his house except for doctor appointments. The dogs still lived with him, though. Elliot could hear them barking in the backyard as Vernon made his way back inside. All day at work, Elliot couldn't shake the dream. He made careless mistakes measuring lumber, his mind replaying Lark's words, "Look under, look under." That evening, he sat in his car outside Vernon's house, watching. The dogs were in the kennel, despite the warm weather. As Elliot watched, Kaiser, the largest of the 3 German shepherds, began digging frantically at one corner of the kennel floor. Vernon appeared from the back door, shouting and waving his cane. "Stop that! Kaiser, stop!" The dog ignored him, continuing to dig until Vernon managed to hobble across the yard. When Vernon reached the kennel, he did something odd. Instead of simply scolding the dog, he knelt painfully on the ground and inspected the spot where Kaiser had been digging. Then he glanced around nervously, as if checking whether anyone had seen. Elliot slid down in his car seat, heart racing. What was Vernon hiding? The next day, Elliot called Captain Santos. "I think we need to check under Vernon's kennel again," he said without preamble. Santos sighed. "Elliot, we've been through this. There's nothing." "I had a dream," Elliot interrupted. "I know how that sounds, but it was different from my usual nightmares. Lark was there, pointing at the kennel, telling me to look under it." "A dream isn't evidence," Santos said gently. "But what I saw yesterday might be," Elliot continued, telling her about Kaiser's digging and Vernon's strange reaction. "Dogs dig," Santos pointed out, "and of course, Vernon wouldn't want them destroying the kennel floor. Can't you just check again? Please." The ground-penetrating radar was 5 years ago. Maybe something's changed. There was a long pause. "I can't authorize department resources based on a dream and a dog digging, Elliot. You know that." Elliot's grip tightened on the phone. "Then I'll check myself." "Don't," Santos warned. "Vernon could press charges for trespassing. And honestly, I'm worried about you. You've been doing so well. This fixation on Vernon isn't healthy." "It's not a fixation," Elliot insisted. "It's a feeling, a certainty. Please, May." He rarely used her. "First, name." 5 minutes with the radar. That's all I'm asking." "I'm sorry," she said firmly. "If you get some actual evidence, call me. But stay away from Vernon's property." After hanging up, Elliot sat at his kitchen table, staring at the wall where he'd once pinned maps and theories. He'd taken it all. Down during his recovery, packed away the evidence binder, stopped watching Vernon's house obsessively. Had that been a mistake? Was he giving up on Lark by giving up on his suspicions? That night, Elliot attended his support group for parents of missing children. When it was his turn to speak, he mentioned the dream. "It felt like she was really trying to tell me something," he explained. "Am I crazy for thinking that?" Across the circle, Nora Pierce, whose son had vanished while walking home from school 10 years earlier, shook her head. "I don't think you're crazy," she said softly. "But I do think grief plays tricks on us, makes us see patterns that aren't there." Nora's kind eyes held no judgment, only understanding. Unlike most people in Elliot's life, she truly knew what he was going through. "What would you do?" he asked her after the meeting. "I'd listen to what the dream is telling you," she said, "but be careful not to let it consume you again. There's a difference between holding on to hope and holding on to life." Elliot nodded, turning her words over in his mind as he drove home. As he passed Vernon's house, he slowed down. The old man was at his kitchen window, watching Kaiser in the backyard. The dog had resumed digging in the same corner of the kennel. This time, instead of shouting, Vernon just stood there, his face a mask of fear. Elliot drove past without slowing down further. He didn't want Vernon to know he was watching. But that look, that unmistakable flash of terror, stayed with him all night. What was Vernon afraid of? What secret could make an old man look so haunted? Over the next few weeks, Elliot kept his distance from Vernon's property, but his thoughts circled back to the dream and the digging dog constantly. He wanted to believe it meant something, that Lark was somehow reaching out to him. But Dr. Leslie, his therapist, offered a more rational explanation. "Our subconscious processes information differently during sleep," she explained during their monthly session. "You've worried about Vernon and that kennel for years. It makes sense your mind would create a dream connecting Lark to that place." "But what about the dog digging?" Elliot asked. "And Vernon's reaction?" "Dogs dig. Owners get upset about property damage," Dr. Leslie said, echoing Captain Santos's words. "I'm concerned that you're looking for patterns that confirm what you've always suspected, instead of considering other possibilities." Elliot wanted to argue, but he remembered how his obsession had nearly destroyed him 3 years ago. He couldn't go back to that dark place. "What do you suggest?" he asked instead. "Keep living," Dr. Leslie said simply. "You've made so much progress, Elliot. You're working steadily. You're connecting with people in your support group. These are good things." After the session, Elliot found himself driving to the community center where his support group met. It wasn't a meeting day, but he knew Nora Pierce volunteered there on Wednesdays, organizing a food pantry for families in need. He found her sorting canned goods, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. At 48, Nora carried her grief with quiet dignity. Unlike Elliot, she had other children, 2 daughters now in college, who had needed her to keep functioning after her son disappeared. "Need an extra pair of hands?" Elliot asked. Nora looked up, surprised but pleased. "Always." As they worked side by side, Elliot told her about his therapy session and his struggle to balance hope with healing. "When does looking for answers become unhealthy?" he asked, stacking boxes of pasta on a shelf. Nora considered this. "I think it's when the search starts hurting you more than helping you," she said finally. "When it keeps you from living any kind of life at all." "How do you do it?" Elliot asked. "How do you keep going without knowing?" "One day at a time," Nora said. "And I try to make Michael's life mean something by helping others." She gestured. "Around the food pantry. This is part of that." Something shifted in Elliot's perspective. For 5 years, he had defined himself solely as Lark's father, the man searching for his missing daughter. Everything else, his work, his home, his health, had become secondary. What if there was another way to honor Lark while waiting for answers? The next day, Elliot called Wilson Construction and asked for the afternoon off. Then he drove to his old workshop for the first time in years. Dust covered the tools and half-finished projects he'd abandoned after Lark disappeared. He ran his hand over his workbench, remembering how Lark used to sit on a stool in the corner, drawing pictures while he worked. "What would you think of your dad now?" he whispered to the empty room. Slowly, Elliot began to clean. He swept the floor, wiped down tools, organized scraps of wood. By evening, the workshop looked almost as it had when he used to bring Lark here after school, before their world shattered. Over. The next month, Elliot spent his evenings and weekends in the workshop. He started small, a birdhouse, a simple shelf, rebuilding his confidence along with his carpentry skills. When Nora mentioned that the community center needed new bookcases for their children's reading program, Elliot volunteered immediately. The nature work felt good, purposeful. For the first time in years, he was creating something instead of just surviving. Meanwhile, across the street, Vernon Blackwood's health continued to decline. A home health nurse started visiting 3 times a week. The dogs spent most of their time in the house now rather than the kennel. Once, Elliot saw an ambulance in Vernon's driveway, lights flashing but no siren. Vernon returned home the next day, looking frailer than ever. "He won't be around much longer," Mrs. Rodriguez observed one evening as she and Elliot watched the nurse help Vernon up his front steps. "Congestive heart failure, my cousin at the hospital says." Elliot nodded, surprised to feel a twinge of sympathy for the old man. For years, Vernon had been the focus of his suspicion and rage. Now, watching him shuffle painfully into his house, Elliot saw just a sick old man nearing the end of his life. Had he been wrong all this time? Had his grief twisted an innocent neighbor into a monster in his mind? The questions followed Elliot to his next therapy session with Dr. Leslie. "I've spent 5 years convinced Vernon took Lark," he admitted. "What if I've been wrong? What if I've wasted all this time?" "Focusing on Vernon gave you something concrete to direct your anger toward," Dr. Leslie suggested. "It's easier than accepting the randomness of tragedy." "But what if my dream was trying to tell me something?" Elliot persisted. "What if I'm missing something important?" Dr. Leslie sighed. "Dreams aren't prophetic, Elliot. They're expressions of our subconscious thoughts and fears. So you think I should just let it go? Accept that I'll never know what happened to Lark? I'm suggesting you open yourself to the possibility that Vernon might not be involved," Dr. Leslie clarified. "That doesn't mean giving up on finding answers about Lark. It means being willing to look in new directions. New directions." The phrase stayed with Elliot as he left the session. Perhaps he had been too fixated on Vernon. Perhaps there were other avenues he hadn't explored, other possibilities he'd overlooked while obsessing over the neighbor and his dogs. That weekend, Nora invited Elliot to join her and several other members of their support group on a camping trip to Pine Ridge State Park. Her daughter Amber was leading the expedition, as part of her outdoor leadership program at college. "I haven't been camping since," Elliot trailed off. "Since before Lark vanished. Before his life split into two distinct parts." "It might be good for you," Nora said. "A change of scenery, fresh air, time to think about something besides—" She stopped herself. "Besides Lark?" Elliot finished for her. "I never stop thinking about her. You know that." "I know," Nora said softly. "I never stop thinking about Michael either. But sometimes, just for a little while, I let myself focus on other things too. It doesn't mean I love him any less." Elliot considered this. The old Elliot would have refused immediately. Leaving Pinefield would have felt like abandoning Lark, like giving up. But maybe Dr. Leslie was right. Maybe he needed to look in new directions, not just for clues about Lark, but for ways to keep living while he searched. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll go." As he packed his camping gear that evening, Elliot glanced out his window. Vernon stood in his yard, watching Kaiser, who had returned to his digging spot by the kennel. This time, Vernon didn't yell or wave his cane. He simply watched, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Vernon didn't look away. Instead, he nodded. Once, as if acknowledging something between them. Then, he slowly turned and disappeared into his house. The camping trip was exactly what Elliot needed. For 3 days, he hiked through pine forests, slept under stars, and sat around campfires with people who understood his loss without needing constant explanations. He still thought about Lark, pointing out birds she would have loved, saving a pretty stone she would have added to her collection. But the sharp edge of his grief felt somehow softer in the mountains. "You seem different," Nora observed on their last morning, as they watched the sunrise from a rocky overlook. "More at peace." "Not at peace," Elliot corrected her. "But maybe accepting that peace is possible someday." Driving back to Pinefield that afternoon, Elliot felt clearer than he had in years. Dr. Leslie and Nora were right. His fixation on Vernon had become a way to avoid the terrifying randomness of what happened to Lark. If Vernon wasn't responsible, then it meant Lark had been taken by a stranger, someone who might never be found. That thought had always been too painful to face. But now, 7 years after her disappearance, Elliot was finally strong enough to consider it. He would keep looking for Lark, keep hoping, but he would no longer let suspicion consume him. He would build a life that honored her memory instead of freezing in the moment he lost her. As Elliot drove into town, dark clouds gathered on the Iuan horizon. The radio warned of a major storm system moving in, potential flash flooding, wind damage, power outages. He stopped at the grocery store for supplies, finding the shelves already half empty as townspeople prepared. "They're saying it could be the biggest storm to hit Pinefield in 50 years, the cashier told him as she bagged his items. "Better batten down the hatches." By the time Elliot reached his street, fat raindrops were already splattering against his windshield. He hurried inside with his groceries, then went through the house checking windows and gathering flashlights and candles. Outside, the wind picked up, bending tree branches and sending trash cans rolling down the street. Elliot paused at Lark's bedroom window, which faced Vernon's house. Through the intensifying rain, he could see Vernon's nurse helping him secure his porch furniture. The dogs paced anxiously behind the front door, barking at the thunder that rumbled in the distance. As Elliot watched, the nurse pointed to the backyard and said something to Vernon. The old man nodded grimly. Together, they made their way around the side of the house. A few minutes later, Elliot saw them leading all three German shepherds into the garage, apparently moving them from the kennel before the storm hit. By nightfall, the storm had become a fury of wind and water. Rain lashed against Elliot's windows like handfuls of thrown pebbles. The power flickered once, twice, then failed completely, plunging the house into darkness broken only by lightning flashes. Elliot lit candles and tried to read, but the howling wind made it hard to concentrate. He found himself repeatedly drawn to the windows, watching the storm's assault on the neighborhood. During one brilliant flash of lightning, he noticed that part of Vernon's dog kennel had collapsed, under the weight of water pouring off the roof. "Guess those old dogs are lucky. They got moved to the garage," Elliot muttered to himself. Just then, his phone rang. Captain Santos, checking on residents in low-lying areas. "I'm fine," Elliot assured her, "but you might want to check on Vernon Blackwood. Part of his kennel just collapsed." "I'll add him to the list," Santos promised, sounding exhausted. "The creek's overflowing downtown. We've got people stranded at the grocery store and the community center. It's all hands on deck tonight." After hanging up, Elliot peered out at Vernon's house again. No lights were visible. The power was out on the whole block. But during the next lightning flash, Elliot saw something that made him sit up straight. A beam of light, a flashlight, bobbed in Vernon's backyard. The old man was out in the storm, making his way toward the damaged kennel. "What the hell?" Elliot murmured, pressing his face closer to the glass. Another lightning flash showed Vernon kneeling in the mud beside the collapsed section of the kennel, his rain poncho whipping around him in the wind. He seemed to be searching for something, his flashlight beam moving frantically across the ground. The next flash revealed something else, something shiny and metallic, where part of the kennel floor had been exposed. Something that looked like a handle? Elliot's heart began to pound. Was this what his dream had been trying to tell him? Was there something under the kennel after all? He grabbed his phone and called Captain Santos again. "I think there's something under Vernon's kennel," he said as soon as she answered. "Some kind of door or hatch. The storm damage exposed it, and now he's out there in the middle of the night, trying to check on it." Santos sighed. "Elliot, I know you want to believe." "I'm not imagining things," Elliot interrupted. "I can see it from my window. A metal handle attached to what looks like a small door in the ground. Even if there is a door, it could be anything," Santos said reasonably. "A utility access point, an old storm cellar. Vernon was a civil engineer, remember? Lots of older homes have underground spaces." "Then why is he so panicked about it? Being exposed?" Elliot demanded. "I don't know, Elliot." Santos's voice was strained. "But right now, I've got actual emergencies to deal with. Half the downtown area is underwater. Call me tomorrow when things calm down." She hung up before Elliot could argue further. Frustrated, he turned back to the window. Vernon was still there, now appearing to be covering the exposed area with a tarp. Without stopping to think, Elliot grabbed his raincoat and a flashlight. He had to see what Vernon was hiding, what had been underneath that kennel all these years. If he was wrong, if it was just a utility access as Santos suggested, then he could finally put his suspicions to rest. But if he was right... The rain hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside. Wind threatened to tear his coat open as he fought his way across the street, head down against the stinging droplets. By the time he reached Vernon's yard, he was soaked through despite the raincoat. Vernon's gate had blown open in the wind. Elliot slipped into the backyard, his boots sinking into mud. The beam of his flashlight bounced wildly as he approached the kennel. Vernon was nowhere to be seen. He must have gone back inside. The damaged section of kennel was worse up close. A portion of the chain-link roof had completely collapsed, and rushing water had eroded part of the concrete floor, exposing what was unmistakably a small metal door set into the ground. A heavy-duty handle, now partially visible, was attached to it. The tarp Vernon had placed over it had already blown away in the wind. Elliot's hands shook as he reached for the handle. All these years of suspicion and doubt, and here was proof that something was hidden beneath the kennel. Was it possible? Could Lark actually be— "Stop!" a voice shouted behind him. Elliot whirled around to find Vernon standing a few feet away, his thin frame barely staying upright in the howling wind. In his trembling hands, he held a shotgun. "You don't understand," Vernon said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I was only trying to help." "Help who?" Elliot shouted back. "My daughter! Did you take her, Vernon? Is she down there?" Vernon's face contorted with some strong emotion. Fear? Guilt? The rain streaming down his wrinkled cheeks looked like tears. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," he said. "I just couldn't stop him. I couldn't—" A blinding flash of lightning struck a nearby tree, followed instantly by an explosive crack of thunder. Vernon cried out, clutching his chest, the shotgun falling unfired from his hands. He crumpled to the ground, his face twisted in pain. Heart attack, Elliot realized. The old man was having a heart attack. For a crucial moment, Elliot hesitated. He could leave Vernon here in the rain, dying, and finally discover the truth behind the metal door. Or he could try to save the man who might have stolen his daughter's life. It wasn't really a choice. Elliot pulled out his phone and dialed 911, kneeling beside Vernon and holding the phone to his ear with one hand while checking for a pulse with the other. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" The dispatcher's voice came through faintly. "My neighbor's having a heart attack," Elliot shouted over the storm. "Vernon Blackwood, 425 Rose Maple Street. He's elderly. History of heart problems. We're in the backyard. Please, hurry." As he waited for help to arrive, Elliot's gaze kept returning to the metal handle gleaming in the mud. After years of suspicion and searching, the answer might be just inches away. Before he could change his mind, he reached out and pulled. The small door opened with surprising ease, revealing a set of concrete steps leading down into darkness. Elliot stared into the black void, rain dripping from his hair and running into his eyes. The beam of his flashlight barely penetrated the gloom below. Every instinct told him to descend those steps immediately, to search for any sign of Lark. But Vernon lay unconscious beside him, his breathing shallow and irregular. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder as emergency vehicles approached. Elliot knew he had only minutes before paramedics and possibly police would arrive. Whatever was down. Those stairs had been hidden for 7 years. What difference would a few more hours make? But what if Lark was down there? What if she had been there all this time, just across the street from her own home? The thought was unbearable. "I'll be right back," Elliot told the unconscious Vernon, though he wasn't sure if he was making a promise or an excuse. Taking a deep breath, Elliot swung his legs over the edge of the opening and began to descend. Concrete steps. The air below smelled musty but not foul. Not the terrible odor he had feared might greet him. 8 steps down, the stairway ended at another door, this one made of heavy steel. Elliot tried the handle. Locked. He pounded on the metal surface, calling out, "Lark! Lark! Are you in there? Only silence answered him. Frustrated, he aimed his flashlight around the small landing, looking for another way in or a hidden key. There was nothing except bare concrete walls. The sirens grew louder, now just blocks away. Reluctantly, Elliot climbed back up to the surface, where rain continued to pour from the angry sky. Vernon hadn't moved, but his chest still rose and fell with shallow breaths. Within minutes, an ambulance and a police cruiser pulled up in front of Vernon's house. Paramedics rushed into the backyard with a stretcher, while Officer Reyes, A.B.D. young cop Elliot recognized from the police station, approached more cautiously, one hand on his holster. "Mr. Meadows? What's going on here?" Reyes called over the storm. His eyes flicked to the open hatch in the ground, then to Vernon's prone form, and finally to the shotgun lying in the mud. "Is that your weapon?" "It's Vernon's," Elliot explained quickly. "He came out here when the storm damaged his kennel. I saw him from my window, acting strangely. When I came to check, he collapsed. Heart attack, I think." Reyes frowned, clearly suspicious of finding Elliot, a man known for his obsession with his missing daughter and his neighbor, in Vernon's yard during a storm, with Vernon unconscious and a gun nearby. "And what's this?" Reyes gestured to the open hatch. "I don't know," Elliot admitted. "Some kind of underground room. The storm washed away part of the kennel floor and exposed it." The paramedics lifted Vernon onto the stretcher. One of them turned to Reyes. "We need to move now. His vitals are crashing." "Go," Reyes ordered, then turned back to Elliot. "I need to secure this scene until we figure out what's going on. Wait in your house. I'm calling the captain." "I want to see what's down there," Elliot protested, taking a step toward the hatch. "That's not happening," Reyes said firmly. "This is a potential crime scene, Mr. Meadows. Please go home before I have to arrest you for interfering." Elliot wanted to argue, but the rational part of his brain, the part he'd worked so hard to strengthen over the past few years, recognized that fighting with the police wouldn't help. If there was evidence about Lark down those stairs, it would be better to have police document it properly. "I'll be right across the street," he said, backing away. "Please, find out what's down there." An hour later, Elliot sat in his kitchen, still in his wet clothes, staring out the window at the activity in Vernon's yard. The rain had finally diminished to a steady drizzle, but wind still gusted, occasionally rattling his windows. More police cars had arrived. Officers strung yellow tape around Vernon's property. Flashlight beams bobbed around the backyard. Elliot's phone rang. Captain Santos. "Are you home?" she asked without preamble. "Yes. What did you find down there?" "I'm coming over. 5 minutes." She hung up before he could ask more questions. Elliot paced his living room, unable to sit still. Had they found Lark? Was she alive? Or had they discovered something else entirely? True to her word, Captain Santos knocked on his door exactly 5 minutes later. She was soaking wet, circles of exhaustion under her eyes. 7 years had transformed the rookie officer who had taken his statement the day Lark disappeared into a confident, capable police captain. But tonight, she looked as drained as he felt. "What's down there?" Elliot asked immediately. "A bomb. Shelter," Santos answered, stepping inside and removing her dripping raincoat. "Cold War era, according to the construction style. Pretty common in this area in the 1960s. Most people sealed them up or converted them to storage decades ago." "A bomb shelter?" Elliot repeated, his mind racing. Did you find?" Santos shook her head. "The shelter itself is empty. Elliot, no sign that anyone has been living there recently." Relief and disappointment battled within him. But someone has been down there. Yes, Santos confirmed. There's a cot, some canned food, books, signs that the space has been used, though not necessarily continuously. Books? Elliot seized on this detail. What kind of books? Children's books, Santos said quietly. Quite a few of them, actually. Some are fairly new, others older and worn. Elliot's heart pounded. Lark loved to read. She always had a book with her. I know, Santos said gently, but we don't know that these books are connected to Lark. We found no personal items, nothing, with her name or yours. Was there anything else? Anything that might tell us who was down there or why? Santos hesitated. There was a drawing taped to one wall, a child's drawing of a girl with red curly hair. Elliot's knees weakened. He sank onto his couch, trying to process this information. Red curly hair? Like Lark's? It could be a coincidence, Santos warned. Children often draw figures with bright red hair. You don't believe that? Elliot said, studying her face. What aren't you telling me? Santos sighed. There's a second door at the back of the shelter. It's padlocked from the shelter side. We haven't opened it yet. Given the construction of the main shelter, it likely leads to a tunnel or perhaps another room. A tunnel? Elliot stood again, adrenaline surging. Like an escape route? Possibly. These shelters were sometimes connected to the main house by tunnels, allowing families to move between them without going outside during an EV emergency. Vernon was a civil engineer, Elliot recalled. He would have known how to build something like that. Yes, but the shelter itself appears much older than Vernon's residence here, Santos pointed out. It was likely built when the house was first constructed, decades ago. Elliot paced again, mind racing. So what now? You're going to open the second door? We've sent for bolt cutters, Santos confirmed. But I wanted to talk to you first, Elliot. I need you to prepare yourself for what we might or might not find. I've been preparing for 7 years, Elliot said, his voice cracking. Every day since she disappeared, I've imagined every possible scenario. Finding her alive, finding her not alive, never finding her at all. There's no outcome I haven't considered. Santos watched him with sympathy. Vernon regained consciousness, briefly in the ambulance. He asked for you, specifically. For me? Elliot was surprised. What did he say? Just your name. Then he lost consciousness again. They're not sure if he'll make it through the night. Elliot absorbed this information silently. For years, he had cast Vernon as the villain in his personal nightmare. Now, with Vernon fighting for his life and a mysterious shelter discovered. Beneath his property, Elliot didn't know what to think. I want to be there when you open that door, he said finally. Santos shook her head. You know I can't allow that. Please, May. Elliot rarely used her first name. 7 years. 7 years of not knowing. I need to be there. Santos didn't respond immediately. Her police radio crackled with updates about flooding. Downtown, she silenced it, then met Elliot's gaze directly. Wait here, she said finally. If, and only if, we determine it's safe, I might be able to bring you in afterward. That's the best I can offer. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. But Elliot nodded, knowing it was all he would get. After Santos left, Elliot changed into dry clothes and made coffee he didn't drink. From his window, he watched the police activity in Vernon's yard. More officers arrived with equipment. The bolt cutters, probably. Just before midnight, his phone rang again. "We've opened the second door," Santos said without greeting. "It's a tunnel, just as we suspected. It appears to lead away from Vernon's property, possibly to another building." "Is there any sign of Lark?" Elliot asked, heart in his throat. "No," Santos said, "but we found a key taped underneath the cot. It might open another door further in the tunnel. We're proceeding carefully." Elliot gripped the phone tightly. "I'm coming over." "Elliot!" "I'll stay behind the police line," he promised. "But I need to be closer. Please." A long pause. "Fine. But you stay exactly where I tell you. Understood?" "Understood." Elliot hung up and grabbed his coat, his hands trembling with anticipation and fear. After 7 years of searching, he might finally be close to discovering what happened to Lark. As he stepped out into the rain-washed night, one thought consumed him. Whatever waited at the end of that tunnel would change his life forever. Police had established a perimeter around Vernon's property with yellow tape and portable floodlights that cast harsh shadows across the muddy yard. Officer Reyes stood at the edge of the tape, keeping curious neighbors at bay despite the late hour and lingering rain. "Mr. Meadows," he acknowledged as Elliot approached. "Captain says you can observe, but you stay behind the tape." Elliot nodded, his eyes fixed on the open hatch in Vernon's yard. A steady stream of officers moved in and out of the underground space, their faces grim and focused. None would meet his gaze. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Captain Santos emerged from the hatch. She spoke briefly with another officer, then ducked under the tape to join Elliot. "We're sending a team through the tunnel," she told him quietly. "Initial assessment suggests it runs about 75 feet in that direction." She pointed toward the next street over. "Toward what?" Elliot asked, trying to picture the neighborhood layout. "There's another house at the end of that trajectory," Santos said. "It's been vacant for years, according to neighbors. Belonged to Vernon's brother, Harold Blackwood." "Vernon's brother?" Elliot's mind raced. "The one who died before Vernon moved here?" Santos nodded. "Property's been tied up in probate. No one's lived there since Harold passed." This new piece of information shifted Elliot's understanding of the situation. Not just Vernon, but his brother too. Had they worked together? Or had Vernon been covering for his brother's crimes? "What do we know about Harold?" Elliot asked. "Not much yet," Santos admitted. "We're pulling records now. Vernon never talked much about him, apparently." A commotion at the hatch drew their attention. An officer was calling for Santos. "Wait here," she instructed Elliot firmly, before rushing back to the underground entrance. Elliot watched as she disappeared down the steps, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The waiting was excruciating. Every minute felt like another betrayal of Lark. She could be down there, somewhere in that tunnel, or at the house at its end. She could have been there all along, just a stone's throw from her own home. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Santos reappeared. Her expression gave nothing away as she approached Elliot. "We've done an initial sweep of the shelter," she said. "I think you should see it." Elliot's heart leaped. "You're letting me go down?" "Just to the main shelter," Santos clarified, "not into the tunnel. Forensics needs to process that undisturbed, but there are things in the shelter you should see." With trembling legs, Elliot followed Santos across the yard to the hatch. An officer held up the metal door as they approached. Santos went first, her flashlight illuminating the concrete steps. Elliot descended carefully, hyper-aware of every sensation: the cold dampness of the air, the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness, the smell of earth and old metal. At the bottom of the steps, a second door stood open, revealing a room about 12 feet square. Battery-powered crime scene lights had been set up, casting the shelter in a harsh bluish glow that made everything look slightly unreal. Elliot's first impression was one of surprising orderliness. The space was small, but efficiently arranged. A narrow cot stood against one wall, its thin mattress covered with a faded blue blanket. Metal shelves held canned goods, bottles of water, a first aid kit, and a small camp stove. A plastic bucket in one corner served as a makeshift toilet. But it was the opposite wall that drew Elliot's full attention. Children's books. Dozens of them were stacked neatly on a low shelf. Above them, several drawings had been taped to the concrete wall. Simple crayon pictures. A house with a smoking chimney. A rainbow over mountains. A stick figure family holding hands. And most prominently, exactly as Santos had described, a drawing of a girl with wild red curly hair. Elliot moved toward it, as if in a trance. The drawing showed the girl standing next to a tall figure, a man, and what appeared to be a dog. All three were smiling, the child's smile drawn as an oversized half-circle taking up most of her round face. Is it? Elliot couldn't finish the question. We don't know, Santos said gently. There's no name on it, no date. Elliot turned slowly, taking in every detail of the shelter. It wasn't what he had expected. There were no chains, no signs of someone being held against their will. The space was spare but not inhumane. Someone had taken care to make it habitable. It looks like a hiding place, he said finally, not a prison. Santos nodded. That was our impression as well. But why would Vernon hide a child here? And where is she now? We're hoping the tunnel will lead to answers, Santos replied. The team is proceeding carefully. Old tunnels like this can be unstable, especially after all the rain we've had. Elliot moved to the cot and sat down heavily, trying to process what he was seeing. His fingers traced the edge of the thin mattress, wondering if Lark had slept here. Had she been scared? Had she called for him in the night? Someone lived here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe not all the time, but regularly. Yes, Santos agreed. And recently, too. Some of the canned goods haven't collected much dust. The blanket smells recently washed. Elliot's gaze traveled to the back of the shelter, where the second door stood open, revealing the entrance to the tunnel. It was smaller than the main door, more like a hatch than a proper doorway. A heavy padlock hung open from the latch. "Where's the key you found?" he asked. Santos pointed to a small evidence bag on one of the shelves, taped to the underside of the cot frame, right where you're sitting. Elliot stood abruptly, as if burned. The idea that he had been sitting exactly where someone, Vernon, his brother, had hidden a key made his skin crawl. "What does it open?" he asked. "Another door at the end of the tunnel?" "Most likely," Santos acknowledged. "We'll know soon. The team has almost reached the end, according to their last radio check." Just then, an officer appeared at the shelter entrance. "Captain, they've reached the house. They're requesting you join them." Santos turned to Elliot. "I need to go. You should return to your home." "No," Elliot said firmly. "I'll wait here." "Please, May. I can't leave now." Santos hesitated, then sighed. "You can wait upstairs, behind the police line. Officer Chen will escort you. I'll send word as soon as we know anything." It wasn't what Elliot wanted, but he recognized it was the best offer he would get. Reluctantly, he followed Officer Chen back up the concrete steps to the rainy yard. For the next 2 hours, Elliot stood in the drizzle, watching the hatch. Officers came and went. Equipment was carried in. At one point, a forensics team arrived with additional lighting and collection kits. No one would tell him anything. Around 3 a.m., Elliot's phone rang. It was the hospital. "Mr. Meadows? This is Nurse Patel from Pinefield Memorial. You're listed as Mr. Vernon Blackwood's emergency contact." This was news to Elliot. "I am?" "Yes, sir. He added you just last month. Mr. Blackwood is asking for you. His condition has stabilized, but the doctor feels it would be best if you could come right away." Elliot looked toward the hatch, torn, between staying for news about the tunnel and going to Vernon, who might finally provide answers directly. "Mr. Meadows, are you there?" "Yes," Elliot said. "Tell him I'm on my way." He found Captain Santos and told her about the call. "That's unexpected," she said, frowning. "Why would Vernon list you as his emergency contact?" "I have no idea," Elliot admitted. "But if he's willing to talk to me—" "Go," Santos decided. "We're still processing the tunnel and the house. It's going to take hours. If Vernon's willing to explain what all this means, that could save us valuable time." "Call me if you find anything," Elliot insisted. "Anything at all." "I will," she promised. "And Elliot? Be careful with Vernon. We still don't know exactly what his role in all this was." The drive to Pinefield Memorial took only 10 minutes through the empty, rain-slicked streets. The hospital was busy despite the hour, with several people in the ER waiting room, likely victims of storm-related accidents. Nurse Patel met Elliot at the information desk and led him to the cardiac care unit. "Mr. Blackwood is very weak," she warned. "The doctor has given permission for a brief conversation only." Elliot nodded, his mind racing with all the questions he wanted to ask. What happened to Lark? Where is she now? Why the shelter? Why the tunnel? Vernon's room was dimly lit. The only sounds the beeping of monitors and the old man's labored breathing. He looked even frailer than usual, his skin ashen against the white hospital sheets. His eyes were closed when Elliot entered, but they fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. "Elliot," Vernon whispered, his voice barely audible. "You came." "I came," Elliot confirmed, moving to the bedside. "The police are at your house, Vernon. They found the shelter. They found the tunnel." Vernon nodded weakly. "I knew they would, after the storm. That's why I was out there, trying to secure it before it was too late." "Too late for what?" Elliot asked, leaning closer. "Vernon, where is my daughter? Was Lark in that shelter?" Vernon's roomy eyes filled with tears. "Not anymore," he whispered. "But yes, she was there. She was there, and I couldn't stop it." "Stop what? Who took her?" Vernon's gaze drifted to the window, where lightning still occasionally illuminated the night sky. "My brother," he said finally. "It was Harold. Always Harold." "Your brother took Lark?" Elliot fought to keep his voice level. "Where is she now? Is she alive?" Vernon's eyes closed, tears spilling down his wrinkled cheeks. "The key," he whispered. "Did they find the key?" "Yes," Elliot said. "Under the cot." "Good. That's good. It opens the second door." at the back of the tunnel. You have to see for yourself." "See what?" Elliot demanded, desperation making his voice harsh. "Vernon, please, just tell me if my daughter is alive." Vernon's eyes opened again, meeting Elliot's directly. "I never hurt her," he said with sudden clarity. "I brought food, books, tried to make it better. The others too." "Others?" Elliot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "There were other children?" Vernon nodded weakly. "Harold collected them. Said he was saving them from bad homes. I didn't know. Not until after he died. Found his journal. Found the tunnel. Found them." The monitors began beeping more, rapidly as Vernon's heartbeat increased. A nurse appeared in the doorway, concerned. "Sir, I think you should leave now. Mr. Blackwood needs to rest. Just one more minute," Elliot pleaded. "Vernon, where are they now? Where did you take them?" Vernon's gaze was growing unfocused, his breathing more labored. "Couldn't bring them out," he whispered. "Too afraid. What people would think. My own brother. A monster. So I kept them safe. Fed them. But she's waiting for you now. Behind the second door. You just need the key." The nurse moved forward decisively. "That's enough. You need to leave now." As Elliot backed toward the door, Vernon called after him with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," the old man cried. "I thought I was helping. I thought I was helping them all." The nurse firmly escorted Elliot from Vernon's room as the old man's monitors continued to beep frantically. Doctors rushed in as Elliot stood in the hallway trying to process Vernon's confession. Harold had taken Lark. Harold had collected children. And Vernon, rather than reporting his brother's crimes, had become their secret caretaker after Harold's death. Elliot's phone vibrated in his pocket. Captain Santos. "I just talked to Vernon," Elliot said before she could speak. He confessed. His brother Harold took Lark and other children. Vernon found them after Harold died and has been hiding them ever since. A heavy silence followed. Then, "That matches what we're finding, Elliot. We've reached the end of the tunnel. It leads into the basement of Harold Blackwood's house, just as we suspected. We're searching the property now. Did you find Lark? Or any children?" "Not yet," Santos admitted. "But there's evidence they were there recently. Fresh food in the kitchen. Beds that look slept in. We found a room upstairs with newspaper clippings about missing children cases, including Lark's." Elliot's legs nearly gave out. He leaned against the hospital wall for support. "Vernon said Lark is behind the second door. What does that mean? Did you find another door?" "There are several doors we haven't opened yet," Santos said. "Locked. Rooms at the back of the house. We're proceeding carefully, setting up proper lighting and documentation before we enter." "I'm coming back," Elliot decided. "Vernon's with the doctors. I've learned all I can from him." "Hurry," Santos said, an unusual urgency in her voice. "I think we're close, Elliot. Really close." 20 minutes later, Elliot pulled up in front of a dilapidated two-story house 3 blocks from his own home. Like Vernon's house, it was surrounded by police tape and lit by portable floodlights. Unlike Vernon's relatively well-maintained property, this house showed years of neglect. Peeling paint, overgrown yard, sagging porch. Captain Santos met him at the police line. "We found something you should see," she said, without preamble, lifting the tape for him to duck under. She led him up the creaking porch steps and through the front door into a cluttered living room. The house smelled musty, with undertones of mildew and something else Elliot couldn't identify. Dust covered most surfaces, but there were clear paths where someone had regularly walked. Santos guided him past officers cataloging evidence and up a narrow staircase to a small bedroom at the back of the house. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was meticulously organized. One wall was entirely covered with photographs, dozens of them, arranged in neat rows. Children's faces stared back at Elliot. School photos, newspaper clippings, even what appeared to be surveillance shots of kids playing in parks or walking to school. Some photos had red X's drawn through them. Others had question marks. A few had nothing. And there, in the center of the wall, was Lark, her second-grade school photo, taken just weeks before she disappeared. Beside it, a candid shot of her playing in their front yard, taken from a distance, without Elliot's knowledge. "Oh, God," Elliot whispered, his stomach churning. He was watching her, planning. "It appears Harold Blackwood targeted multiple children over at least 2 decades, Santos said, quietly. "Based on the dates on these news clippings, we've identified 7 missing children, cases that may be connected to him." Elliot forced himself to look away from Lark's photo, scanning the wall of children's faces. What do the X's mean? Santos's expression darkened. "We don't know yet. Possibly children who didn't survive. We've found no remains on the property, but cadaver dogs are en route." The implication sent ice through Elliot's veins. He turned back to Lark's photo. No X, no question mark, just a map pinned beside it with a location circled in red. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to the map. Santos stepped closer. "It's a topographical map of the mountains about 3 hours from here. We've already sent officers to the marked location. It's apparently a remote cabin." "A cabin?" Elliot's mind raced. "Vernon said she's behind the second door. Could that be what he meant? Another location entirely?" "Possibly," Santos agreed. "Or it could be one of the locked rooms we haven't opened yet. The key you found might—" She was interrupted by her radio crackling to life. "Captain, we need you in the basement. We found something behind the wall." Santos and Elliot hurried back downstairs and through the cluttered house to the basement. Stairs. The tunnel entrance was visible on one side of the basement, a crude opening in the foundation wall, reinforced with wooden beams. On the opposite wall, officers had removed sections of drywall, revealing another hidden doorway. "This house is full of secrets," Santos muttered as they approached. "False walls, hidden rooms, the tunnel." One of the officers handed Santos the key they had found taped under the cot in Vernon's shelter. She examined it briefly, then inserted it into the lock of the newly discovered door. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a heavy click. The door opened to reveal what appeared to be a storage room, about 8 feet square. Metal shelves lined. The walls filled with supplies, more canned food, jugs of water, blankets, children's clothing of various sizes. A small generator sat in one corner beside a portable heater. "Emergency supplies," Santos observed. "But for what?" Elliot moved deeper into the room, scanning the shelves. On one, he found a plastic bin filled with children's toys, dolls, action figures, toy cars, and beneath them, something familiar, a flash of faded pink fabric. With trembling hands, Elliot reached for it. A small backpack, decorated with butterflies. The one Lark had gotten for her 7th birthday, just months before she vanished. The one she'd refused to use because it was too babyish for 2nd grade. "This is Lark's," he said, his voice breaking. He unzipped the bag, and a small notebook fell out. Opening it, he found pages of childish handwriting. At the top of the first page, Lark's diary. Santos moved to his side, examining the notebook. "This confirms she was here," she said, softly. "At least for some time." With shaking fingers, Elliot turned the pages. Entries were dated sporadically over what appeared to be several months after her disappearance. The handwriting was unmistakably Lark's, with her distinctive backward Ys and oversized dots over the I's. "She writes about a man bringing her here," Elliot said, scanning the entries. "Must be Harold." And later, another man bringing food and books. That would be Vernon. He turned another page and froze. "Listen to this. Today, the nice man said we have to leave. Someone might find the tunnel. We're going to a cabin in the mountains. He says it's safer." There. Santos's radio crackled again. "Captain, the team at the mountain cabin reports they've arrived on scene. The structure appears occupied, but no response to calls. They're establishing a perimeter and awaiting instructions." Elliot and Santos locked eyes, the same thought passing between them. Lark might be alive. She might be at that cabin, right now. "Let's go," Santos said decisively. "I'll drive. We can be there by dawn." As they rushed from the house to Santos's police SUV, Elliot clutched Lark's diary to his chest. For the first time in 8 years, he had concrete proof that his daughter had survived her abduction. Vernon's words echoed in his mind. "I thought I was helping them all." Them all. Not just Lark. How many children were at that cabin? And after 8 years, would Lark even remember him? The SUV's engine roared to life as Captain Santos hit the lights and siren. As they sped through the pre-dawn darkness, rain still falling softly, Elliot opened Lark's diary to the last entry. It was dated just 3 months ago. "I still remember my real dad," she had written in now mature handwriting. "Even though Keeper says he didn't want me anymore. Sometimes I dream about going home, but I don't even know where home is now." Tears blurred Elliot's vision as Santos guided the vehicle onto the highway heading west, toward the mountains, toward Lark. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. As dawn broke, golden light spilled over the mountains in the distance. In another life, Elliot might have found it beautiful. Now, he barely noticed as he read and reread the entries in Lark's diary, trying to piece together what had happened to his daughter in the 8 years since she disappeared. She mentioned someone called Keeper several times, Elliot said, turning a page carefully. "I think that must be a woman." Lark writes, "Keeper says girls need to learn how to cook, but she won't let me use the sharp knives yet." Santos kept her eyes on the road, but nodded. "Makes sense. Vernon couldn't have been caring for multiple children full-time while maintaining his normal life. He must have had help, or more. Likely, someone else was primarily responsible for them. But who? And why? We'll find out, Santos promised, pressing the accelerator harder as they followed the winding mountain road. Elliot turned another page in the diary. Here's an entry from about 6 years ago. "Today, 2 new kids came to live with us. A boy and a girl. They cried all night. I told them it gets better, but I don't think they believe me." The implications were chilling. Harold Blackwood had died before Vernon moved to Pinefield, which meant someone else had continued abducting children, even after his death. The radio crackled with updates from the officers already at the cabin. They had established a perimeter, but still no movement from inside. They were awaiting a tactical team before attempting entry. 3 hours into the journey, they turned onto an unmarked gravel road that climbed steeply, through dense forest. "We're close," Santos said, checking the GPS coordinates against the map found in Harold's house. "Less than 2 miles. Elliot's heart hammered in his chest. After 8 years of searching, of hoping and despairing, he might be minutes away from seeing Lark again. What would she look like now? Would she recognize him? Would she even want to come home after so long? The radio crackled again. "All units hold position. We have movement at the cabin. Someone's coming out." Santos and Elliot exchanged tense glances as she accelerated up the final stretch of road. As they rounded a bend, a small clearing came into view. In the center stood a rustic cabin. Its wooden, walls weathered gray by years of mountain seasons. A stone chimney rose from one end, thin smoke curling into the morning air. The clearing buzzed with police activity. Squad cars formed a perimeter around the property. Officers in tactical gear crouched behind vehicles, weapons ready. A command center had been established in a police van at the edge of the clearing. Santos parked behind the van and turned to Elliot. "Stay here until I know it's safe." "No way," Elliot said firmly. "I've come too far." "Elliot, I'll stay behind the police line," he promised, "but I need to be there, please." After a moment, Santos nodded reluctantly. "Stay with me. Do exactly as I say." They approached the command center where Lieutenant Rivera was coordinating the operation. "What's the situation?" Santos asked. "Female subject exited the cabin approximately 10 minutes ago," Rivera reported. "Elderly, possibly 70s, appeared unarmed but refused commands to approach officers. She returned inside after shouting something about protecting her children." "Any visual on the children?" Santos asked. "Negative. Blinds are drawn on all windows. We've established communication via megaphone, but no response since the initial contact." Elliot strained to see the cabin through the ring of police vehicles. Was Lark in there? After all, these years, was she just yards away? "I want to talk to her," Elliot said suddenly. "The woman in the cabin." Santos and Rivera looked at him, in surprise. "That's not standard procedure," Rivera began. "Nothing about this case has been standard," Elliot countered. "Look, if this woman has been caring for these children for years, she obviously believes she's protecting them. Maybe I can convince her that at least one of those children has a father who never stopped looking for her." Santos considered this. "It's worth a try," she decided after a moment. "Better than forcing a confrontation with children potentially in the crossfire." Rivera looked skeptical, but handed over a radio headset connected to their communication system. "She can hear you through our speaker system. Just press this button to talk." Elliot took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. What could he possibly say to convince this woman to release children she had apparently dedicated years to protecting? He pressed the button. "My name is Elliot Meadows," he began, his voice carrying across the clearing to the silent cabin. 8 years ago, my daughter Lark disappeared from our front yard while playing. She was 7 years old with curly red hair and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Whiskers." He paused, swallowing hard. "I never stopped looking for her. Not for one day. I found her diary in Harold Blackwood's house. I know she's been living with you, possibly with other children. I know you call yourself Keeper." No response came from the cabin. Elliot pressed on. "I don't know why you've kept these children. Maybe you thought you were saving them. Maybe you thought you were giving them a better life. But I can tell you that Lark was loved. She is still loved, and I've come to take her home." For several long moments, silence hung over the clearing. Then, the cabin door opened a crack. A thin, reedy voice called out, "You're lying! You're just saying things you found in the news." Elliot's heart leaped. She was engaging. Lark hated peas but loved lima beans, which made no sense to me because they're practically the same thing, he said quickly. She slept with her closet light on because she thought monsters couldn't get her if they could see her first. Her favorite book was Where the Wild Things Are, and she made me read it every night for 3 months straight until I had it memorized. The door opened wider, revealing an elderly woman with long gray hair pulled back in a braid. She wore a simple dress and cardigan, looking more like a grandmother than a kidnapper. "Those things aren't in any news story," Elliot continued. "I know them because I'm her father. I've always been her father, and I never stopped looking for her." The woman, Keeper, studied him from the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of suspicion and uncertainty. She said her father didn't want her anymore, she called. That's what Harold told her. Harold lied, Elliot replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. He stole her from her yard while I was answering the phone. I've spent 8 years searching for her. I never gave up. Keeper seemed to be weighing his words, her frail hand clutching the doorframe. "The others," she said finally. "What about the others?" "We'll find their families too," Santos interjected through the speaker system. "Every child deserves to go home." "Home?" Keeper's voice turned bitter. "Some didn't have homes worth returning to. Harold saved them. I protected them." "From what?" Elliot asked. "From the cruelty of the world," Keeper replied. "From neglect and abuse and indifference. Here, they've been safe, loved, educated." "In isolation," Santos countered. "Cut off from the world. That's not protection, ma'am. That's imprisonment." Keeper's face hardened. "You don't understand. None of you understand. I won't let you take them." She began to retreat back into the cabin. "Wait," Elliot called desperately. "Please, at least let me see her. Let me talk to Lark. Let her decide." Keeper hesitated in the doorway. "She doesn't go by that name anymore," she said quietly. "She's Aurora now, like the dawn." "Aurora, then," Elliot agreed quickly. "Please, let me speak with her." For what felt like an eternity, Keeper stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes darting between Elliot and the police surrounding her cabin. Finally, she turned and disappeared inside, closing the door behind her. "Did we lose her?" Rivera asked tensely. "Give her a minute," Santos advised, her hand on her holster, but her tone calm. 3 minutes passed. 5. The tactical team shifted, restlessly, awaiting orders. Then the door opened again. Keeper emerged, and behind her stood a tall, thin girl with wild, curly red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a faded blue sweater, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. Her face, once round with childhood, had thinned into delicate features that echoed her mother's. But her eyes, those were the same bright green eyes that had looked up at Elliot from a crib, from a bike with training wheels, from the yard on that last terrible day. Lark, Aurora, stared at him across the clearing. No recognition in her expression, just wariness and confusion. "She doesn't remember you," Keeper said, an arm around the girl's shoulders. Harold and Vernon made sure of that. "Let me talk to her," Elliot pleaded, taking a step forward. Aurora's gaze fixed on him more intently, her head tilting slightly, as if trying to place a half-remembered face. She's made her life here, Keeper insisted. She's happy. Am I? Aurora spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. Are any of us really happy? Keeper? Keeper turned to her in surprise. Of course you are. I've given you everything. Accept the truth, Aurora replied, still studying Elliot. Accept the choice. And with those words, something shifted in the standoff. The girl who had been Lark Meadows took a small step away from the woman who had raised her for 8 years, toward the man who had never stopped searching. Aurora. No, Keeper pleaded, reaching for her arm. They'll separate all of you, the family. We're not a family, Aurora replied softly. We're survivors. She took another step forward. The police remained tense, weapons ready, but Santos raised a hand, silently ordering them to hold position. This delicate moment required patience, not force. How many others are inside? Santos called. Aurora turned toward the captain's voice. 5, she answered. The youngest is 8. The oldest is 17. All kidnapped? Santos asked. Aurora hesitated. Keeper says they were rescued, saved from bad situations. She looked back at Elliot. She said you didn't want me anymore. That you answered the phone instead of watching me because you were tired of being a dad. The accusation hit Elliot like a physical blow. That's not true, he said, his voice breaking. Answering that phone was the biggest mistake of my life. I've spent every day since wishing I could take it back. Something flickered in Aurora's eyes. Doubt, recognition, a long-buried memory, struggling to surface. Let me show you something, Elliot said, reaching slowly into his pocket. He withdrew Mr. Whiskers, the once plush rabbit now worn thin from years of being carried everywhere. One button eye was missing, the floppy ear barely attached. But it was unmistakably the same toy that had been left behind in the yard 8 years ago. Aurora froze at the sight of the stuffed rabbit. Mr. Whiskers, she whispered, the name coming to her lips automatically. You left him in the yard that day, Elliot said gently. I've kept him with me ever since, waiting to give him back to you. Aurora stared at the stuffed rabbit, transfixed. Behind her, Keeper made a small, distressed sound. Don't listen to him, Aurora, she warned. Harold lied about everything, Aurora interrupted, not taking her eyes off Mr. Whiskers. Just like Vernon did, just like you did, Keeper. She turned to face the elderly woman. You told us we were special, chosen, but we were stolen, weren't we? All of us. Keeper's face crumpled. I was trying to protect you. The world is cruel to children. I gave you safety, education, love, and lies, Aurora added. So many lies. With heartbreaking dignity, the 15-year-old girl who had once been 7-year-old Lark turned back to Elliot. May I? She asked, gesturing to Mr. Whiskers. Elliot nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He held out the tattered rabbit. Aurora approached cautiously, stopping just beyond arm's reach. Her eyes darted between Elliot and the stuffed toy, as if trying to connect disjointed memories with the reality before her. I used to sleep with him under my pillow, she said tentatively, because Mom gave him to me before the accident, Elliot finished softly. You were 4. You insisted on bringing him to the funeral, and nobody had the heart to say no. Something broke in Aurora's expression then. A wall crumbling, a past rushing back. "I remember the funeral," she whispered. "Black dresses, rain. You carried me because I wouldn't walk." "Your shoes kept sinking in the mud," Elliot confirmed, tears flowing freely now. "You said it was because the ground was sad, too." Aurora reached out and took Mr. Whiskers, cradling the worn toy against her chest. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, eyes closed, face pressed against the rabbit's faded fur. When she looked up, her expression had changed. There was recognition there now, clouded, with confusion and fear, but unmistakably present. "Dad?" she whispered, the words sounding strange and wonderful on her lips. Elliot could only nod, unable to speak. Behind Aurora, Keeper sank to her knees in the cabin doorway, her face in her hands. "I only wanted to keep you safe," she sobbed. "All of you, safe from people who would hurt you." Aurora turned back to her. "But you hurt us too, Keeper, by taking our lives away, by keeping us from our real families." "Not all of you had families worth returning to," Keeper insisted, looking up with tear-streaked cheeks. "Some were being abused, neglected. Harold knew which ones to save." "That wasn't his choice to make," Santos said, stepping forward. "Nor yours." "The other children," Elliot said gently to Aurora. "Can you bring them out? We need to make sure they're okay." Aurora hesitated, still clutching Mr. Whiskers. "They're scared," she explained. "Keeper told us. People would come to hurt us someday. That we'd have to hide deeper in the mountains." "We found a map in Harold's house," Santos explained, "with this location marked. Were you planning to move again?" Keeper's head snapped up, her expression suddenly sharp. "The map," she said. "You found it?" "Yes," Santos confirmed, watching her closely. "Was there somewhere else you were planning to take the children?" Keeper struggled to her feet, something like panic in her eyes. "It wasn't for them," she said. "The BKE map. It wasn't about them." "Then what was it for?" Santos demanded. Keeper shook her head. "I never knew. It was Harold's secret. Something hidden. Something he said would protect us all if anything ever happened to him." Aurora looked between the adults, confusion evident. "There's a shed," she offered hesitantly. "About half a mile into the woods behind the cabin. We're not allowed there. Keeper goes, sometimes, with supplies." Santos turned to Lieutenant Rivera, who immediately organized a team to investigate the shed. "The other children," Santos reminded Aurora gently. "Can you help us bring them out safely?" Aurora nodded, handing Mr. Whiskers back to Elliot. "I'll get them. But promise they won't be hurt? Some of them don't remember anything from before." "I promise," Santos said solemnly. "We'll find their families if possible. If not, we'll make sure they're safe and cared for." Aurora took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked back to Keeper. The old woman reached for her, but Aurora stepped around her, disappearing into the cabin. Keeper remained in the doorway, defeated but still watchful, still protective in her misguided way. Minutes later, Aurora emerged with 5 children of varying ages. The youngest clung to her hand, wide-eyed and frightened. The oldest, a tall boy with a protective stance, scanned the police warily. As paramedics and officers moved forward to care for the children, Aurora returned to Elliot. She didn't speak, didn't reach for him, just stood nearby, studying his face as if trying to reconcile the father in her oldest memories with the man before her. "I kept your room exactly the same," Elliot said softly. "For years. I always hoped—" Aurora nodded. Keeper said hope was dangerous. "It's the only thing that kept me going," Elliot replied. "Hope and love." His radio crackled. Rivera's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Captain Santos, we've found the shed. You need to see this. Right now." Santos exchanged a quick glance with Elliot. "Stay with your daughter," she said quietly, before turning to head into the woods. "Wait," Elliot called. "I want to know what's going on." "So do I," Aurora added, her voice surprisingly firm. Santos hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but the other children need to stay here with the paramedics." The three of them set off along a narrow trail behind the cabin, following the directions from Rivera's team. Aurora walked slightly ahead, navigating the path with the confidence of someone who knew these woods well. Elliot noticed how she moved, alert, cautious, like a wild animal accustomed to watching for predators. "Did you come out here often?" he asked, trying to bridge the vast gulf of lost years between them. "Only when Keeper allowed it," Aurora replied. "Supervised walks to collect berries or herbs. Never alone. Never too far." She glanced back at him. "The shed is off limits. She told us it was dangerous. Rotting floors, rusty nails." "But you didn't believe her?" Santos asked. Aurora shrugged. "Keeper said lots of things to keep us close to the cabin." 10 minutes later, they reached a small clearing where a weathered wooden shed stood, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. Police officers had secured the area and stood guard outside. Lieutenant Rivera waited for them, his expression grim. "What did you find?" Santos asked. Instead of answering, Rivera led them to the shed door, which stood open. Inside, the single room was surprisingly orderly. Metal shelves along one wall held supplies, canned food, bottled water, first aid kits. A small generator sat in one corner. At first glance, it looked like a simple storage space. "I don't understand," Santos said, looking around. "What's so urgent about this?" Rivera pointed to the far wall, where a heavy metal hatch was set into the floor. "It's what's under the shed that's concerning," he said. "The hatch was locked, but we found a key on a hook behind the door." "Another shelter?" Elliot asked, remembering the one beneath Vernon's kennel. "Not exactly," Rivera replied. "It's more like a well, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "You should see for yourselves." Santos approached the open hatch. A metal ladder descended into darkness. One of the officers handed her a powerful flashlight, and she directed the beam downward. The shaft extended about 15 feet before opening into what appeared to be a small chamber. "We've verified it's structurally sound," Rivera assured them, "but we haven't fully explored it yet. Thought you should see it first." Santos began descending the ladder. After a brief hesitation, Elliot followed, leaving Aurora with Rivera above. At the bottom, Santos's flashlight revealed a concrete chamber about 10 feet square. Unlike the shelter beneath Vernon's kennel, this space wasn't designed for comfort. The walls were bare, concrete. The floor was dirt. But most disturbing were the metal rings embedded in the walls, the kind used for securing chains. "What is this place?" Elliot whispered, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Santos directed her flashlight to one corner, where a pile of blankets lay. Beside them, scratched. Into the concrete wall were dozens of tally marks, days counted perhaps, and below them, crudely etched names. "I think," Santos said slowly, "this is where Harold Blackwood kept the children before Keeper took over their care." Elliot felt physically ill. So Keeper wasn't lying. She did rescue them from this. From Harold's basement to her cabin, Santos agreed grimly. An improvement, certainly, but still captivity. A movement from above caught their attention. Aurora was descending the ladder despite Rivera's protests. Her face, when she reached the bottom, showed no surprise at what she saw. "You knew about this," Santos realized. Aurora nodded, her expression distant. "I was here for a while, before the cabin, when Harold was still alive." "You were kept down here?" Elliot asked, horrified. "At first," Aurora confirmed, "until I learned to be good. Not to try to run, not to talk about home." Her eyes moved to the scratched names on the wall. Carefully, she approached and traced her fingers over one set of marks. "I was Lark then, before I became Aurora." Elliot struggled to find words, to process the horror of what his daughter had endured. "How long?" he finally managed. "I don't remember exactly. Weeks, maybe. Then Harold moved me to the house in town. Later, after he died, Vernon found us. He seemed scared, confused. That's when Keeper came. She told us Harold had asked her to care for us if anything happened to him." "Who is she?" Santos asked. "How was she connected to Harold and Vernon?" "Their sister," Aurora answered. "Half-sister, I think. She lived far away before. Harold wrote to her about us. She said she came as soon as she could after he died." The pieces were falling into place now. A twisted family operation. Harold had abducted the children. Vernon, discovering his brother's crimes after his death, had been too cowardly to contact authorities but unwilling to abandon the children. Instead, he'd reached out to their sister, who had taken over with her own disturbing philosophy about protecting them. "There's something else," Aurora said quietly. She moved to another corner of the chamber and knelt on the ground, brushing away dirt from the floor. She revealed a small metal door, similar to the one that had been beneath Vernon's kennel, but smaller. "Another tunnel?" Santos asked. Aurora shook her head. "I don't think so. I found it once when Harold left me alone down here. I tried to open it, but it was locked. When he caught me, he—" She trailed off, unconsciously, rubbing her wrist, where a faint scar circled the skin. Santos knelt beside Aurora, examining the door. "No visible lock or handle," she observed. "How does it open?" "I don't know," Aurora admitted. "But Keeper comes down here sometimes. I followed her once, watched through a crack in the shed floor. She opened it somehow." As if in answer to her statement, the sound of footsteps on the ladder made them all turn. Lieutenant Rivera was descending, his expression urgent. "Captain, Keeper is demanding to speak with you," he reported. "She says she knows what you're looking for, and she'll show you how to open it if you promise leniency for her care of the children." Santos's eyes narrowed. "Bring her down." Minutes later, a handcuffed Keeper was escorted down the ladder by 2 officers. The elderly woman looked around the chamber with obvious distaste. "Harold's methods were cruel," she said, her voice steady despite her circumstances. "I gave those children a home, education, kindness. But not freedom," Santos countered. Keeper's chin lifted defiantly. "The world would have destroyed them. They weren't ready." "Show us how to open the door," Santos demanded, gesturing to the metal plate in the floor. Keeper hesitated, looking at Aurora. "You always were the curious one," she said softly. "Always watching, learning. I knew you'd find this place eventually." "What's behind the door?" Aurora asked. "Insurance," Keeper replied cryptically. "Harold's insurance. And later, mine." She turned to Santos. "If I show you, I want your word that you'll tell the courts how I cared for the children, how I educated them, kept them safe, how I was better than Harold." "I'll tell the truth," Santos said carefully. "That's all I can promise." Keeper considered this, then nodded slowly. "The mechanism is pressure-sensitive," she explained. 3 points must be pressed in the correct sequence. She knelt by the door, her handcuffed hands making the movement awkward. Carefully, she pressed 3 seemingly random spots around the edge of the metal plate. With a soft click, the door popped up slightly. Santos nodded to an officer, who moved forward to lift the door fully open. Beneath was a small cavity, perhaps 2 feet deep. Inside sat a waterproof container. The officer carefully removed the container and opened it. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Birth certificates, social security cards, driver's licenses, and photographs. Disturbing. Images of children in various settings, some clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. Harold's collection, Keeper said quietly. Records of all the children he watched, the ones he took, and the ones he planned to take. With shaking hands, the officer passed several documents to Santos. She examined them, her expression darkening. "These aren't just records," she said. "These are complete identity packages, multiple identities for each child, with documentation." She looked up at Keeper. He wasn't just taking children. He was erasing them, preparing to move them, sell them. Keeper's face remained impassive. "I never knew what he intended. When I found these, after Vernon contacted me, I realized how dangerous it would be if anyone discovered them. Proof of everything. So I kept them hidden. Insurance, like I said, in case we ever needed to disappear. Completely." The full horror of the operation was becoming clear. Not just a disturbed man abducting children he believed needed saving, but a sophisticated trafficking operation with multiple identities prepared for each victim. "How many?" Elliot asked, his voice barely audible. Santos flipped through the files. "At least 24 different children documented here. Dating, back nearly 20 years. And the other names on the wall?" Elliot gestured to the scratched markings Aurora had examined earlier. "The ones who didn't survive Harold's care," Keeper answered, her voice oddly detached. "The ones who fought too hard or got too sick. The weak ones." A heavy silence fell over the underground chamber. Aurora moved closer to Elliot, not quite touching him, but seeking proximity for the first time. "Where are they?" Santos asked, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "The children. Who didn't survive?" Keeper's gaze moved to a far corner of the chamber, where the dirt floor appeared slightly different, darker, more compacted. "Oh, God," Elliot breathed. "Get her out of here," Santos ordered the officers. "And get the forensics team down here. Now!" As Keeper was escorted up the ladder, Elliot turned to Aurora, desperate to shield her from this final horror. But her expression was calm, almost resigned. "I always knew," she said quietly. "Some kids just disappeared. Keeper said they'd been placed with new families. But we all suspected." Elliot tentatively placed a hand on her shoulder. To his surprise, she didn't pull away. "Let's go back to the cabin," he suggested gently. "You don't need to be here for this part." Aurora nodded, looking exhausted. Together, they climbed the ladder, leaving Santos and her team to the grim task of uncovering the final victims of Harold Blackwood's twisted operation. As they emerged into the sunlight, Elliot noticed something he'd missed earlier. Just beyond the shed, barely visible among the underbrush, was an old well, its stone rim crumbling, its depths hidden in shadow. Aurora followed his gaze. "That's where Keeper drew our water," she said. "She wouldn't let us go near it. Said it was dangerous." A cold chill ran through Elliot as he realized there might be even more horrors to uncover on this remote mountain property. From behind them came the sound of Santos climbing out of the chamber, already on her radio, requesting additional forensic teams and equipment. "What happens now?" Aurora asked, watching the activity around them with wary eyes. "We go home," Elliot said simply. "If you want to." Aurora's gaze drifted back to the cabin in the distance, where the other children were, being cared for by paramedics and officers. And them. "The police will try to find their families," Elliot explained. "If they can't, there are people who will help them. Specialists who understand what they've been through." Aurora nodded, seeming to accept this. After a moment, she looked back at Elliot. "Do you still live in the same house? The one with the oak tree in the front yard?" The question, so normal, yet coming after such horror, caught Elliot off guard. "Yes," he managed. "The same house. Your room is different now. I hope that's okay." "That's okay," Aurora said. Then, hesitantly, she added, "I'm not the same either." As they walked back toward the cabin, a search dog began barking excitedly near the old well. More officers rushed toward the sound, but Elliot guided Aurora in the opposite direction, away from whatever new discovery awaited. Whatever happened next, whatever horrors still lay hidden on this mountain, one miracle had occurred. Lark, Aurora, was alive, changed, scarred, carrying 8 years of experiences Elliot could barely comprehend, but alive and coming home. As they approached the cabin clearing, paramedics were examining the other children. The youngest boy, about 8 years old with wide brown eyes, ran to Aurora as soon as he saw her. "Aurora!" he cried, clinging to her waist. "Are they taking us away?" Keeper said bad people would come. Aurora knelt to his level, gently placing her hands on his shoulders. "They're not bad people, Kip. They're here to help. Remember how I read you stories about families? Some of these people are going to help you find your real family." "But you're my family," Kip insisted, tears welling in his eyes. "You and Keeper and everyone in the cabin." Aurora glanced up at Elliot, a flash of uncertainty crossing her face. This was the reality of their situation. The children had formed bonds, created their own kind of family within their captivity. Undoing that would be another trauma. "We'll always be connected," Aurora told Kip carefully. "But there might be people out there who have been looking for you. Like my dad was looking for me." She nodded toward Elliot, and Kip studied him warily. "He doesn't look mean," the boy conceded after a moment. "He's not," Aurora agreed. "Now, go back to Ms. Hernandez, okay? She's going to check that you're healthy." As Kip reluctantly returned to the paramedic, Elliot marveled at Aurora's maturity, her natural role as protector of the younger children. In those 8 lost years, his little girl had grown into someone strong and compassionate. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it. Captain Santos approached them, her face drawn after what she'd seen in the underground chamber. "We'll need formal statements from all the children, including you, Aurora," she said, gently. "But it can wait until tomorrow. Right now, we need to get everyone to the hospital for evaluation." "They'll be scared if you separate them," Aurora warned, "especially the younger ones." Santos nodded. "We'll keep that in mind. The priority is making everyone feel safe." A sudden commotion near the well caught their attention. Officers were calling for the forensic team, their voices urgent. Santos excused herself and hurried back toward the shed. "They found something in the well, didn't they?" Aurora asked quietly. Elliot didn't answer directly. "You don't need to worry about that now." "I'm not a little kid anymore," Aurora said, a hint of frustration in her voice. "I lived here. I knew what was happening, even if Keeper thought she was protecting us from the truth." Elliot chose his next words carefully. "You're right. You're not a little kid, but you don't have to carry all of this. That's what adults are supposed to do, carry the hardest things so children don't have to." "No one carried it for us before," Aurora pointed out. "I know," Elliot acknowledged. "And that was wrong. So wrong that I don't have words big enough for it. But it's different now." Aurora considered this, then nodded slightly. Her attention shifted to the paramedics preparing to transport the other children. "Can I ride with them? To the hospital? They trust me." "I'll see if we can arrange it," Elliot promised. As afternoon faded into evening, the mountain property became a hive of investigative activity. More police arrived. The forensic team expanded their search around the well and the underground chamber. Media vans began appearing at the end of the gravel road, held back by a police barricade. Aurora rode in the ambulance with the younger children, while Elliot followed in Captain Santos's police SUV. At the hospital, social workers joined the team of professionals evaluating the children. Despite the commotion, the hospital staff created a calm, safe environment, keeping the children together in a large private room with toys, books, and gentle activities. Elliot stayed nearby, watching Aurora interact with the other children. She moved among them with quiet authority, explaining procedures, offering reassurance, translating the outside world that most of them barely remembered. "She's remarkable," Dr. Chen, the lead pediatrician, commented to Elliot. "Her resilience, her ability to care for others despite her own trauma. It's extraordinary." "Will she be okay?" Elliot asked, the question that had been burning in his mind since the moment he saw her standing in the cabin doorway. Dr. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Physically, she appears healthy. Mentally and emotionally. That's a longer journey. But having you in her life, knowing she was never forgotten or abandoned, that will make an enormous difference." As the evening progressed, the younger children gradually fell asleep on cots and makeshift beds in the hospital room. Aurora sat beside Kip, who refused to sleep until she read him a story. Elliot watched from the doorway, hearing his daughter's gentle voice weaving a tale about a brave little fox finding his way home through a dark forest. A soft sound behind him made Elliot turn. A large German shepherd in a police K9 vest stood in the hallway, its handler a few steps behind. "Elliot Meadows?" the handler asked. "Captain Santos sent us. This is Max. He was at the mountain property all day, helping with the search." Elliot nodded, unsure why the captain had sent a police dog to the hospital. "Max found something we thought you should see," the handler continued, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small plastic evidence bag containing a scrap of faded fabric. Elliot's breath caught as he recognized the pattern. Tiny pink and purple butterflies, the same as on the backpack they'd discovered in Harold's house. The same as the dress Lark had been wearing the day she disappeared. "Where did you find this?" he asked, taking the bag with trembling fingers. "Near the well," the handler explained. Max kept returning to that spot, even after the forensic team moved on to other areas. He dug this up from under some leaves and brush. The dog sat at attention, watching Elliot with intelligent eyes. "Good boy, Max," Elliot said softly, reaching down to pat the dog's head. "Thank you for finding this." Max whined softly, then turned and trotted back down the hallway, his handler following after a respectful nod to Elliot. Elliot stood in the hallway, staring at the fabric scrap. A piece of Lark's dress, buried in the woods for 8 years, now recovered by a dedicated search dog. It felt like the closing of a circle somehow. When he looked up, Aurora was standing in the doorway, watching him. "What's that?" she asked, nodding to the evidence bag. "A piece of the dress you were wearing when you disappeared," Elliot explained. "A police dog found it near the well." Aurora's expression changed subtly. "Kaiser," she said. "What?" "Vernon's dog, Kaiser. He used to bring us things sometimes. Small things he found in the woods, sticks, toys, pieces of cloth. Vernon would get angry, but Kaiser kept doing it." Elliot's mind raced, putting together pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed. Vernon's dogs were digging at the kennel, he remembered. That's what first made me suspicious. And when the storm damaged it— "Dogs remember," Aurora said simply. "Better than people sometimes." A comfortable silence fell between them. After a moment, Aurora gestured to the sleeping children in the room behind her. "They're all out now. Even Kip finally fell asleep." "You should rest, too," Elliot suggested. Aurora nodded but made no move to go back inside. Instead, she leaned against the door frame, studying Elliot with those familiar green eyes. His eyes, her mother's shape. "I remember some things," she said finally. "Not everything, but pieces. Birthday cakes with blue frosting because it was my favorite color. A tree house you started building but never finished. Mom singing in the kitchen." Each memory was a gift Elliot had never expected to receive. "The deed-on treehouse," he said with a small smile. "I promised to finish it that summer. After you disappeared, I couldn't bring myself to look at it. It's still there, though, half-built." "Maybe we could finish it," Aurora suggested tentatively. "Someday, not right away." "I'd like that," Elliot said, his heart swelling with cautious hope. A social worker approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Meadows, we need to discuss temporary chute guardianship arrangements. Given the unique circumstances, there will be a process to formally re-establish your parental rights, but we want to ensure Aurora can go home with you as soon as she's medically cleared." Home. The word hung in the air between them. "Is that what you want?" Elliot asked Aurora directly. "To come home with me? You don't have to decide right now. There are other options if you need more time." Aurora considered this, her expression unreadable. "The house with the oak tree," she said. Finally, "Does it still have the porch swing?" "Yes," Elliot confirmed. "The same one." "And Mrs. Rodriguez still lives across the street? With the roses?" "She does. Her roses win prizes at the county fair now." Aurora nodded, processing this information. "I'd like to see it again," she said carefully, "to see if it feels like home still." The social worker smiled. "That sounds like a reasonable approach. We can arrange a transitional plan." Later that night, after forms were signed and preliminary arrangements made, Elliot found himself alone in the hospital cafeteria. The events of the past 24 hours, the storm, the discovery of the shelter, finding Lark, the horrors of the mountain property, all of it swirled in his mind, overwhelming in its intensity. Captain Santos joined him, looking exhausted, but determined. She set a cup of coffee in front of him. "They found 3 sets of remains in the well," she said without preamble, "and 2 more in the underground chamber. We're working to identify them, but based on the documentation we found, they likely match children reported missing between 10 and 20 years ago." Elliot nodded, unable to formulate a response to such horror. Vernon regained consciousness briefly. Santos continued. "He made a full confession. He claims he discovered what his brother was doing only after Harold died, when he found the tunnel connecting their properties. He couldn't bring himself to report it. Family loyalty, fear of association, who knows. But he also couldn't abandon the children. So he contacted their sister, believing she would help him figure out what to do. But she had her own ideas," Elliot finished. "Exactly. She convinced Vernon that exposing what Harold had done would only traumatize the children further. That they needed stability, not the chaos of the system. Vernon went along with it, using the tunnels to bring supplies while she established the cabin as a more permanent solution." "How could they think that was helping?" Elliot asked, the question that had haunted him since Vernon's confession in the hospital. Santos shook her head. "People justify terrible things to themselves. Vernon was weak. Keeper was delusional. And the children paid the price." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all settling between them. "What happens to Aurora now?" Santos asked finally. "She wants to see the house again," Elliot said, "to see if it still feels like home. And if it doesn't?" "Then we find a new place that does," Elliot said firmly. "Whatever she needs, however long it takes." Santos nodded approvingly. "You're going to be okay, Elliot. Both of you." The next afternoon, after medical evaluations confirmed all the children were physically healthy. Despite their ordeal, Elliot drove Aurora back to Pinefield. The other children remained at the hospital, awaiting identification and family reunifications, where possible. As they turned onto their street, Elliot felt Aurora tense beside him. The neighborhood looked much as it had 8 years ago. Though some houses had been repainted, trees had grown. Taller, new families had moved in. Vernon's house stood empty, police tape still across the yard where the storm had exposed the secret that changed everything. Elliot pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "We can just sit here for a while if you want," Elliot offered. "No rush." Aurora stared at the house, her expression unreadable. Then she opened her door and stepped out, approaching the oak tree in the front yard slowly. She placed her hand on its rough bark, looking up at branches that had grown substantially since she last played beneath them. Elliot followed, keeping a respectful distance, allowing her this moment of reconnection. Mrs. Rodriguez waved from across the street, but seemed to understand the delicacy of the situation and didn't approach. "This is where it happened," Aurora said, moving to the spot in the yard where Mr. Whiskers had been found. "Right here." "Yes," Elliot confirmed, his throat tight. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the house, the yard, the street. "It's smaller than I remembered," she observed. but also the same. Elliot waited, his heart pounding. Would she recognize this place as home? Could it ever be home again after everything that had happened? A sound in the distance caught Aurora's attention. A dog barking. She tensed momentarily, then relaxed as she saw a golden retriever being walked down the street. Vernon's dogs, she said suddenly. What happened to them? Animal control took them, Elliot explained. They'll be evaluated, probably rehomed. Aurora nodded thoughtfully. Kaiser was the one who kept digging at the kennel. He knew there was something underneath. He was trying to help. I think he was, Elliot agreed. Aurora's gaze returned to the house. Can I see inside? She asked. Of course. Elliot led the user way up the porch steps and unlocked the front door. The house was exactly as he'd left it when he rushed out during the storm. Coffee cup on the counter, book open on the sofa, rain jacket thrown over a chair. Normal. Ordinary. A stark contrast to the extraordinary events of the past 2 days. Aurora stepped inside cautiously, her eyes moving from the living room to the kitchen to the hallway, leading to the bedrooms. She touched familiar objects: the lamp beside the couch, the refrigerator door, the banister of the staircase. You said my room was different now, she recalled. It's my office, Elliot explained. I can easily move everything out if you want. It back as your bedroom. Aurora shook her head. I don't think I could sleep in there anyway. Too many before memories. There's a guest room, Elliot suggested. Or we could look for a new house entirely, if that would be better. Aurora considered this, then walked to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. From there, she could see the half-finished treehouse, weathered by years of exposure, but still clinging to the old maple tree. You really never finished it, she said softly. I couldn't, Elliot admitted, but I couldn't tear it down either. Aurora turned to him, really looking at him perhaps for the first time since their reunion. You never gave up, she said. Not quite a question. Never, Elliot confirmed. Not for one day. She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Then, slowly, she walked to the coffee table, where Mr. Whiskers sat, retrieved from Elliot's jacket pocket where he'd been keeping the stuffed rabbit. Close. Aurora picked up the worn toy, examining it with a complex mix of emotions playing across her face. Then, deliberately, she placed Mr. Whiskers on the sofa cushion between them, not quite returning him to Elliot, not quite keeping him for herself, sharing him, a bridge between who they had been and who they were now. I think, she said carefully, I could try living here for a while, to see if it works for both of us. It wasn't a joyful homecoming. It wasn't the tearful reunion Elliot had imagined countless times over the years. It was tentative, fragile, filled with unspoken trauma and challenges yet to face. But it was real, and after 8 years of searching, of hoping against hope, it was enough, more than enough. Welcome home, Lark, Elliot said softly, then quickly corrected himself. I'm sorry, Aurora. She considered this, head tilted slightly. Maybe both, she suggested. Aurora, to the world, but Lark here, with you. If that's okay. That's perfect, Elliot assured her, his heart full. Outside, as evening settled over Pinefield, a dog barked in the distance. Not an ordinary sound, but a connection to the extraordinary truth of how they had found each other again. Through storm damage and kennel floors, through tunnels and diaries, through the persistence of dogs who sensed what humans could not. Through the simple, unstoppable force of a father who never stopped looking and a daughter strong enough to survive until she could be found. Aurora, Lark, moved to the porch swing as darkness fell, and after a respectful pause, Elliot joined her. They sat side by side, not touching but together, watching the first stars appear in the night sky. Between them, placed carefully on the swing's wooden slat, sat Mr. Whiskers, worn, tattered, but still somehow whole. Like them. Thanks for staying with us through this emotional journey of a father's unwavering love and determination. Where are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us spread these stories of hope and resilience to more people who might need them. Before you go, click on the video appearing on your screen right now titled "Daughter Went Missing at School." 2 years later, Mom zooms in on Google Maps for another incredible story of family reunion that you won't want to miss. Remember, sharing these stories spreads kindness and reminds us all of the power of never giving up hope. See you in the next video.